Developer bootcamps aren't just a way for job seekers to get into coding. Companies can use them and other training programs to invest in their people. We're going to talk about one company that's doing just that and why it's a good idea on this episode of Dynamic Developer. I'm your host, Bill Detweiler, and this week I'm talking to Dave Hooever, a coder, author, founder, and CEO of Red Squirrel, a custom software development firm, and CTO at GoLogic. He was also a co-founder of Dev Bootcamp. Dave, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
So Dave, we talk about dev boot camps. A lot of coders have experience with boot camps. They've been around for a long time, for decades now. Some may be better than others, but I know you're working on something really interesting with a boot camp over at Red Squirrel. And as someone who's the co-founder of Dev Bootcamp, you have a lot of experience with this. Tell me what you're doing at Red Squirrel, this new project you're kind of working on.
It's really interesting and exciting opportunity that we have. It's still early days, but strangely enough, we got contacted by some folks in Northern Italy last year, and they're interested in us creating basically a temporary boot camp, so kind of a transitional education program to help transition a good number of people, like dozens or potentially hundreds of folks, into a career in software development from a more blue collar kind of factory focused work. It's timely because we were finally ready to go and spend time in Northern Italy with them right as the outbreak began in late February, and we had to cancel our trip. Now we're continuing to work with them remotely, just like the rest of the world, and it's been an adventure to kind of watch things through their eyes on the COVID-19 front, but also just to keep moving forward relentlessly towards this challenge of kind of re-educating or transitioning all these folks. And so we're excited as folks who have experience, like deep experience with the bootcamp learning model, who run a consultancy. We're excited to be able to come and bring kind of our expertise into a situation where we can come and create transitions for folks and then move on and do it again. In this first case, we've got, potentially hundreds of folks who are going to be displaced through just factories getting moved to different countries, basically. And we are going to be working with them in Italian through using translations of the curriculum, and as well as we're not going to be delivering the training directly. We'll be training the trainers who will be bilingual, and working with these folks to make this transition. And so we're designing the curriculum in Python. We're designing the program, and we're going to be working closely with this group in Italy to make this happen.
And what's different maybe from boot camps that you've done in the past where it was designed to be more permanent? You said this is going to be like a pop-up. It's a temporary boot camp. What's unique about that type of project?
There's a lot of things that are unique about it. One thing that's unique in this case, we're not just transitioning folks into the general job market. We're actually transitioning them into a specific company. And so that actually gives us the ability to focus the curriculum because we know where they're going. In a typical coding boot camp, they're preparing folks, just like universities are preparing folks, hopefully, for the job market. And so you have to kind of provide general skills and kind of cast a somewhat of a wide net for folks. In this case, we can be specific. We know that this is going to be an IoT-focused company, so we will be focused on IoT and thus using Python because it's better at that than many other languages that are conducive to beginners. It's also unique in the sense that a boot camp obviously is a school, and so you're going to have teachers that are going to be there for years and years, potentially, and directors who are there for years and years to continue to run it. In this case, we're going to have folks just doing that, for a year or two, maybe a year and a half, and then they'll be transitioning into something else. So the whole endeavor is, just more transitional. The nice thing though is I've found that like software, there's a lot of software developers who love to teach. That said, they probably would have gone into teaching full time if they really wanted to do that. So it's nice to be able to do it for a year or two and then go back and be a full-time software developer again. And so I feel like these sort of pop-up experiences actually are kind of nice for folks to like maybe take a year-long contract or something and focus on teaching.
What makes a good software teacher? Not necessarily, you can be a great developer, or you can be a great chef, or you can be a great doctor or a lawyer or whatever it is, but you can be a lousy teacher. What makes a good software developer, coder, teacher?
Well, I mean, I think that what makes somebody good at teaching is, first of all, just at the base level, I feel like it's just a certain level of empathy for the person you're working with who's confused or struggling or just behind you in their journey. Now, you can be a good mentor to someone who's just a few weeks or a few months behind you or a year behind you, and you can distinctly remember everything that they're right now learning. And and there's a lot of people who can do that, but I do think there's a unique person who maybe 15 years into their career and can work effectively with someone who's just starting, who can like cross that huge chasm in skills, right? It's very difficult for someone once they reach a certain level to think like a beginner or even be able to empathize with a beginner. They might have empathy, they might want this person to succeed, but they just can't speak their language. And so I find that teachers, and I bet this is true of all teachers, not just software teachers, to have that ability to, whether they're working with small children or teenagers or adults, they have that ability to to cross that chasm between expert level and total beginner level. I've seen that in our best teachers at Dev Bootcamp, and our lead engineer at Red Squirrel is one of those people, Kevin Solorio.
You mentioned that this was has a definite sort of beginning and will have a definite end, right? And you mentioned that kind of what the outcome is going to be. So that makes the process of maybe designing the transition plan, the lesson plans, knowing those skills at the end that the people need to have. But in a traditional boot camp, you don't sort of have that. What are some of the ways that I guess maybe you've designed the curriculum here from sort of taking someone who's not, doesn't have any dev background, they don't have any experience, I'm assuming, and going into being sort of masters of Python, which seems to be the language that everyone's learning these days, especially if you want to have anything to do with IoT. But talk a little bit about that curriculum process. And do you design the curriculum specifically for these people because you knew they had these skills coming in, kind of like, oh, I don't have to take English 101, or, I can skip that because I already took that in high school. Talk a little bit about that.
We're still in the early days, so we're still learning about exactly what we're dealing with in terms of what the skills that already exist for folks. But we're doing a couple of things. We're doing one or a couple core things very similar to Dev Bootcamp, which is challenge-based learning, right? Like we were talking before about different certifications that used to be popular. Maybe they still are, but often that was just like multiple choice, or like just get the answer right and we'll certify you. And boot camps can't exist in that sort of way of working. It has to be actually coding hard and working hard, working through challenges. And so that's going to be exactly the same in the sense of like, we need our students to be like actively working through problems, multiple challenges a day. So that's the same. What's different is we're going to take a little bit more time. We're not rushing them through quite as much as we did at Dev Bootcamp. And that's just because we know who our end customers, I guess you could say, in the sense of like who's going to be trying to bring these people on board, and they're willing to take a little bit more time to make sure that they've got the more specialized skills.
And how long do you think it's going to take someone to go from the beginning to the end of the boot camp? I remember back in the old days, you were kind of talking about, the dangers of paper certs, things like that. So I remember there were week boot camps. There were 2-week boot camps that you could go to, usually for people that had a base understanding of a given technology, but they were just looking to sort of pass the cert. How long are the students in this case, going to be take to go through your boot camp?
It's going to be a 12-week immersive boot camp.
Okay.
So 3 phases of 4 weeks each. We also have a 4-week prep, like part-time remote prep program. And so there's about 16 weeks of curriculum that people have to work through. It's a lot. It's different I went through the same week-long programs, 15 years ago, that were, just leveling you up in a small, one specific skill, which can work. And sometimes, it's just a waste of time. But these programs are really meant to immerse somebody in a topic, right? In a whole craft, and just completely transform their brain when it comes to this sort of occupation. By the time they get out of it, suddenly it doesn't feel sudden to them. It feels like a long slog. But to the rest of the world, they've just gone from being semi-technical, or maybe they knew how to use Excel pretty well, and now they can code apps in Python, right? Connect to APIs, even write APIs. And so that's the kind of transformational experience that these sort of things create.
If you had any advice to give to companies that were maybe looking to do something similar, as if they're looking to whether to upskill their current employee base, if they're looking to, start a program like this, what's some tips that you would offer them besides just, hey, coming and hiring Red Squirrel?
Yeah, I think a fully immersive experience is expensive in the way of it's very expensive with people's time, right? So somebody, and probably many people, are going to be kind of paying a lot, at least in time, if not money, to go through this sort of experience. And so it's quite an undertaking to create a true boot camp like experience. But interestingly, almost every big successful consultancy ends up creating one of these things, so that they can hire semi expert college grads who are really sharp and smart, and put them through boot camps to prepare them to be strong consultants at Accenture or ThoughtWorks or wherever, IDEO. And so most professional service firms at scale, these technical ones, tend to end up create these things as their onboarding programs. They've existed for a long time. It's just that these boot camps are open to the public, as a means of just general education, or not general education, but open to the public as a very specific kind of education. And so, that said, I think for companies that are interested in leveling up their employees, I think you can create quick hit programs that are more like a week or two, if you can afford it, right? A lot of companies can't afford that at the moment, and so you have to make do with if you do want to build skills, you're gonna have to do that through asking people to take shorter little hits, right? Like little part-time courses, and people squeeze it into their after hours and things like that, which is what so many of us have done for so long. Just what these boot camps do is they just shorten the calendar time from when you start learning to when you've achieved a certain level of or a sufficient level of expertise that you can start getting paid to do this.
Right.
Basically. And so that's what it's really squeezed that's the real innovation, is it just squeezes that okay, you're literally going from semi-technical to I can get paid to be a software developer in like 12 to 14 weeks, which is kind of unique.
So if you have the luxury of being able to do this, that's great. If you don't, then doing these quick hit training sessions, upskilling sessions, looking for ways to do that. Something though I think is interesting that you might be able to talk about, whether you're doing a boot camp or whether you're doing these sort of upskilling things. You talked about the cost. I'm wondering, in your experience though, if yes, it's expensive, but it's less expensive than hiring new talent. And in the long run, so the short term, it's expensive and you've got to devote time and effort and energy and maybe even money to the process of upskilling. But on the back end, you have someone who's more loyal or who's more valuable as an employee. So in the long run, it pays dividends. Has that been what your experience is?
Absolutely. I find that consulting companies tend to have an easier time making that investment because their people tend to be their product, right? When you're upskilling like someone who's a consultant, someone who's getting paid for their time, it's usually a fairly quick ROI. Tougher when it comes to product companies and startups and tech companies whose product, of course, is their software or their like software services, and it's not as a direct ROI when you just invest in the people. Now that said, I think some of the best companies out there do invest in their people, but it requires leadership to take a long-term view, as opposed to the short-term kind of like talent consumer view of just like hire the best people, pay as much as it requires to find them or find them wherever you can in the world, and just get as much out of them in the short term as you can. And that tends to be a vicious circle that ends in a rough culture that doesn't necessarily create a lot of innovation. So it really just does come down to that short-term, long-term view about talent.
So Dave, thanks for joining us. Where can folks go to learn more about what you're doing over at Red Squirrel?
RedSquirrel.com. There's 2 R's in squirrel.
And you can hear more episodes of Dynamic Developer on your favorite podcast platform, or watch a video of each episode, as well as read a transcript at Tech Republic.